Great, thank you so much. And thank you everybody who is joining either in the same room or via the webcast. Just to introduce myself, my name is Toni Williams. I am the Business Development Manager for the South for Rogers CPA Review. I apologize if you hear a little bit of background noise. I have another engagement right after this, so I try to put myself in a somewhat secluded space so there isn't too much background noise for the presentation. Today, we're going to go over the CPA exam seminar to our objectives in just a moment. Just a little bit of background about Rogers CPA Review. Since the company's inception about 2001, we've always been a team that's been very dedicated and passionate about helping students achieve success on the CPA exam, and a lot of our programs trying to be efficient because we don't want you studying any more than you have to. Effective with our 88% pass rate for first-time test takers, including Elijah Watt-Sells Award winners, and then enjoyable because it is proven that if you enjoy what you're doing, the likelihood of you being successful is going to be greater. For the presentation today, what I'm going to talk about are the content, structure, and skill levels of the new version of the CPA exam. I'm going to walk through a few examples of what some of the CPA exam questions may look like. I'm going to talk a little bit about exam time strategy, and not when you're just sitting for the exam, but also when you are studying. Time management is a huge part of your success on the CPA exam, so I'm definitely going to cover that as well. And then I'll go through information on how to apply for the state of Georgia, exam requirements, licensure requirements, and then talk a little bit about exam experience. At the very end, I am going to give you guys just a short overview of Rogers CPA Review's course for those that aren't as familiar, but the main focus of my presentation is going to be on the new version of the CPA exam. So as many of you are aware, there are 4 parts of the exam. You have audit, FAR, BEC, and regulation. The new version of the exam has BEC and regulation at 4 hours. They were previously 3-hour exams, making the CPA exam a 16-hour total exam, as opposed to how the exam was conducted in the past. You don't have to sit for all 4 parts at once. Many people are studying for a part and taking a part, and they have up to 18 months to complete all 4 exams. The start date of your 18 months is not until you pass your very first exam. So any study time prior to actually sitting for and passing that first exam does not count towards your 18 months. For that reason, we typically suggest that a candidate start with FAR, just because FAR does require the most amount of study time and it won't eat into your 18-month time window. However, the order in which you study for the exam is entirely up to you. I've had people who will do FAR first because they've heard it's the most challenging, so they want to knock that out first, but I have people who are working in audit or in tax and they want to do the one that they're more comfortable with before tackling the other exam. So it's entirely up to you what order you want to tackle when you're trying to decide what your game plan is going to be for the exam. In terms of content, as you can see here, I have it broken down so that you can see the individual categories within the 4 exams. They did condense the different categories from the previous version of the exam, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they got rid of some of that content. Some of it they redistributed into other categories, and a little bit of it they actually completely removed from the exam because they realized that they were asking questions that the candidates, that they found to be unfair, because the test is supposed to test candidates on what they should know within their first 2 years of working at a firm. And some of the questions they were asking went beyond that, and they made that realization and got rid of some of that content. But this gives you a general idea of what you're looking at in terms of how the content is weighed in the 4 different exams. I always like to talk about related college courses. With your accounting courses, a lot of the content that you find in the classroom on those exams is going to be relevant for the CPA exam. This is part of the reason why we encourage candidates to sit for the exam as soon as they are eligible. Part of it has to do with you still having a lot of this content fresh in your mind. It's not going to be like you're starting from scratch. A lot of it will be a refresher for you. And another aspect is that you're still in the student mindset. You'll still be used to listening to somebody lecture. You'll still be used to taking exams. We found that the longer people wait from being eligible to sit for the exam in Georgia, it's when they graduate, have their bachelor's degree with the relevant educational requirements, to actually sitting for the exam, the longer they wait, we found that it becomes more difficult for them to actually start the process. Again, you have 18 months, but we find that most of our students pass within a 9 to 12-month time period. Some students do pass in a shorter time period, but most of our candidates are either working or they're in a MAC program, so they use our study planners to kind of balance out their time. Here you'll see some of the content that is being taught in your upper division classes and which of the 4 exams you'll find it in. So if you take an AIS course or a cost accounting class, you'll find that in BEC. Intermediate, advanced accounting, some universities offer a governmental accounting class. You'll find that in FAR. Auditing classes, obviously audit. Any taxation or business law course you'll find in regulation. So we definitely like to make the correlation between the content you're being taught in the classroom and how you're going to see it on the CPA exam. In terms of the new version of the score weighting, audit, FAR, and regulation are now 50% multiple choice and 50% task-based simulation. BEC previously did not have task-based simulations. The new version of the exam does. So you're looking at 50% multiple choice, 35% task-based simulation, and then 15% for your written communication. Oops, let me go back. In terms of the exam structure, this has changed significantly as well. A lot of the changes that happened to the exam April 1st of this year had nothing to do with content. A lot of it had to do with just the structure of the exam and the types of questions they were asking you and how they were formatting those questions. The structure is definitely one thing that changed. There are now 5 testlets for each of the 4 exams. For audit, FAR, and regulation, the first 2 testlets are your multiple choice questions, and then the last 3 are your task-based simulation questions. For BEC, your first 2 are your multiple choice questions. The 3rd and 4th are task-based simulation, and the 5th is your written communication. You'll see that after the 3rd testlet, they have a standardized 15-minute break. That is something new that they incorporated as of April 1st. I highly suggest you take this 15-minute break. It'll give you an opportunity to kind of step away, refocus, regroup before you tackle the second half of the exam. Previously, this was not an option, and if a candidate wanted to take a break, their clock would still be running. So many candidates didn't do so in fear of not being able to complete the exam within the 3 or 4 hours they were given. One thing I do want to point out here as well is with these testlets, it's important that you answer every single question before you close out and move on to the next one, because once you close out of a testlet, you cannot go back and to a previous testlet. And this is not a negatively scored exam, so it's really important that you answer every single question in each of the testlets within the 4 hours. Another thing that they changed within the structure of the exam is that they reduced the number of multiple choice questions and they've increased the number of task-based simulation questions. That's relevant in how you saw the score weighting in the slide 1 or 2 before this. But here you'll see for audit, you have 72 multiple choice questions, 8 task-based simulation. FAR, you have 66 multiple choice questions, 8 task-based simulation. Regulation, 76 multiple choice, 8 task-based simulations. BEC has the least amount of multiple choice, only because you also have the 3 written communications along with your 4 new task-based simulations. This is just an example of what a multiple choice question might look like on the CPA exam while you're at the Prometric Testing Center. A couple of things I like to point out here are that you will always have the countdown timer at the top of the screen. Really important to help you gauge where you're at in the process, and we have a couple of time management tips that I'll get to in a few slides. You will have an on-screen calculator with a running tape function. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see that you can scroll through the different questions within that testlet. So if you find that you're spending too much time on a question and you really need to move on, there's a little gray flag underneath each of these questions, each of the numbers. You can flag a question as a visual cue to yourself to go back to that before you close out of the testlet. And on the upper right, you will see the Submit Testlet button. They actually changed that. I believe previously it said Exit, and it confused a lot of people. So this will submit the testlet, and I believe a disclaimer screen pops up and says, are you sure you want to? Because once you close out, you won't be able to go back in. This is an example of a task-based simulation. The task-based simulations are essentially case studies. They want you, for example, here to fill out this form 1065. All of the highlighted cells are where they want you to input an answer. It will require you to do a bit of work. However, once you click on that highlighted cell, it's still somewhat multiple choice, wherein that they give you a list of options to choose from. You here also have that countdown timer at the top, but you also have a spreadsheet, you still have the calculator, and then you can split your screen between the this form 1065 or a spreadsheet, either horizontally or vertically, or unsplit, and you can just jump from one tab to another. It's really based on your personal preferences here. But even with the task-based simulations, you can scroll through each of them and flag necessary. This is another example of a task-based simulation, just to show you what the drop-down box looks like when you click on one of the highlighted cells to input your answer. This is an example of a research answer entry. So FAR, regulation, and audit will each have a research question. Essentially, we kind of say you're treating it like a Google search. You're going to go into your authoritative literature, which is on this next screen, and you're going to pull out the key information that they're asking you to look for. You can switch back, as you can see if I go back to this other screen. At the very top left of the screen, you can see where you can toggle between the research question and the authoritative literature tab. But here you can see that you can search within it. It will give you the table of contents to make it relatively easy for you to look for what you were searching for. As I mentioned, written communication is found in BEC. You will have 3 written communications there. With that, only 2 of them actually count towards your final score. One of them is what we call a research question, so they're just testing out the question to see if it's worth putting into a future version of the exam. You won't know which one is the research question, so we always encourage candidates to treat all 3 of them as if they're going to count towards their final score. With written communication, they're looking for just that, how well you write. So they want you to reply in a letter memo format, no bullet points, no abbreviations. We are now this generation of texting and abbreviating things and using a lot of, acronyms. That is not what they are looking for. They want to make sure that you are using multiple paragraphs with an introduction, a body, and a closing. They are looking for your grammar. They are looking for your spelling. So definitely make sure that you stay on topic. I'm going to show you an example of what a written communication might look like. And within the question, there will be some keywords. So it's important that you repeat those keywords within your answer. One thing to also note is that this is graded by a computer. So with written communication, the computer isn't necessarily looking for a right or wrong answer. They're looking for all of the things that I mentioned before, that you're staying on topic, repeating the keywords, you have proper formatting, you're spelling everything correctly, your grammar is right, you're using the proper punctuation. The only time that written communication will be graded by a human is if you get a borderline score of 74 to 76. At that point, that proctor will know whether or not you actually did stay on topic, and if you actually knew what you were talking about in terms of the question, and they may judge you a little more harshly than the computer may have. So I always tell candidates that they should aim really high within BEC to ensure that they don't fall in that borderline score category. So an example of what a written communication question might look like is, dear auditor, can you please describe the difference between the following depreciation methods? Straight line, double declining balance, sum of years, digits. Your answer might look something like this. Dear client, I would be happy to assist you with your question. And then in the body, you can see that we are incorporating the three key words or key phrases within the question: straight line depreciation, double declining balance, sum of years, digits. And then we have our closing paragraph. Thank you for your question. If I could be of any further assistance, please don't hesitate to contact me. Really important to just even practice written communication in general. I get a question from candidates a lot as to why written communication is even relevant and why it's incorporated into the exam. And having talked to a lot of recruiters and a lot of firm professionals, written communication is a huge portion of the business that you will be doing, and they want to ensure that you have the right skills to perform your job function. Last summer, summer of 2016, they did introduce a new task-based simulation, which is the document review simulation. Essentially what they're doing is they're providing you with a document and they're asking you to determine what's important, what's not important for solving the problem. So they might give you legal letters or accounts receivable confirmation files, footnote disclosures. This is an example of what a document review simulation is. Within the document review simulation, they will have certain sentences highlighted blue and underlined. Those are the sentences that you're supposed to use to determine whether or not that bit of information is relevant to solving the problem. So you have a few options here. You can either keep the original text, change it to one of the alternative options, or delete the text altogether because it's not relevant at all. Once you make your selection, it will close out this box and it will put a little check mark next to the blue box at the end of that sentence. That's a visual cue to you that you've already answered that question so that you can move on to the next one. And it's a visual cue for all of the sentences before you move on to the next task-based simulation question. You'll see here that if you do decide to delete the text, it will put the strike-through font through that sentence as another visual clue to you that you determined that that sentence was not relevant to the problem you're trying to solve. Another change with the current version of the exam is in the skill difficulty, the skill level difficulty that they're testing candidates on. So the previous version of the exam tested on remembering and understanding, which was typically your multiple choice, and then application, which was typically your task-based simulation questions. The new version of the exam incorporates two higher skill levels, which are analysis and evaluation. Evaluation is going to be the most difficult, but you will see that evaluation currently is only found in the audit portion of the exam. And within audit, it's a very small portion of audit. As I mentioned previously, exam time strategies are very, very important. I will talk about study planners in just a little bit and the amount of time you're expected to spend studying for the exam. But the reason that a lot of people don't pass the exam isn't because they don't know the information or, they're not, intelligent enough to answer these questions. A lot of it has to do with them, one, not devoting enough time to their studies, and then two, not being able to answer all of the questions within the 4 hours. So what this slide shows you is the estimated amount of time you should be spending on each of your testlets to ensure that you answer every single question within the 4 hours. So for audit and FAR, they're very similar. You're looking at 45 minutes for each of your multiple choice testlets, 30 minutes for that third testlet of 2 task-based simulation questions, and then 60 minutes for testlet 4 and testlet 5. With BEC, it's going to be similar with the 45 minutes for the multiple choice questions, multiple choice testlets. Testlet 2 and 4, which are your task-based simulations, you're going to spend a little more time there with 50 minutes each, and then 50 minutes for your 3 written communication questions. Regulation, you're looking at 48 minutes for the multiple choice testlets, 30 minutes for the testlet 3 of the 2 task-based simulation questions, and then 57 minutes for testlet 4 and testlet 5. So what does that really break down to? Something that we previously suggested was to, when you were sitting at the Prometric Testing Center going through those preliminary screens, taking that non-erasable laminated paper and the non-erasable marker in the laminated paper and writing down what you see in this box here. You could just put number 1, the countdown timer should be from 4 hours to 3:15, testlet 2, 3:15 to 2:30, so on and so forth. They did make a change in the amount of time that you have to go through those preliminary screens, where they've actually decreased the time. So we're finding that a lot of candidates now do not have the opportunity to write this down on their laminated pieces of paper, but we do still like to talk about it to give you guys a point of reference in terms of what you should be looking at and what your expectations should be with time on your test day. With the approximate question times, we suggested roughly 45 to 48 minutes for the multiple choice testlets. That breaks down to 75 to 84 seconds per question. That's not a lot of time. That means you have less than a minute and a half to read the question, go through the answers, figure out what they're really asking you, and solve the problem. Some questions you'll know quicker than others, which is great. But again, I think that you should definitely utilize the flags on the bottom of the testing screen if you find that you're spending way too much time on a question. For task-based simulation questions, depending on if it's a general one or a more complex one, you're looking at 15 to 25 minutes per question. Research questions should take about 10 minutes, and then the written communication about 15 minutes per question. Before I move on to the requirements in applying for the exam, does anybody have any questions regarding the actual CPA exam content structure formatting? All right, I will keep on moving then. Each state has very different requirements for not only sitting for the CPA exam, but also getting your licensure. I've worked with a number of states in the South, and I originally started with the company in California, and I have to say that Georgia's requirements are probably some of the easiest and straightforward requirements. So for Georgia, to sit for the exam, all you need is your bachelor's degree with 120 hours, and then 20 hours being in your intermediate accounting or above courses, so your upper division accounting courses. That is all you need to sit for the exam. To apply for the exam within Georgia, you will have to submit your applications and transcripts to NASBA, and you'll do that through their CPA examination online application system. There is a $145 application fee. Then once approved, you will register for your exam parts and submit your fees. This process is very different from state to state. So with Georgia, you will have to pay a registration fee of $65 to $110 on top of the actual NASBA fees for the exam. So you can see here that for all, each of the sections, it's $193.45. It's really important that when you register for your exam part or parts, there's a reason we put that there, that you're only registering for what you realistically will do within a 6-month time period. The reason being is that when you receive your notice to schedule, that notice to schedule is only good for 6 months. So if you jumped the gun and decided that you were going to apply for all 4 exams at once, that means that they expect you to sit for all 4 of those exams within a 6-month time period. Realistically, most people do not do that unless they're being really ambitious and they have nothing else to do. Essentially, when you see the study planners, people who do a 3 or 6-month time period for their 4 exams typically aren't working, they aren't going to classes, they're sacrificing their social life just so that they can knock this out as soon as possible. Most people, what they will do is they'll say, okay, in this first 6 months, I know that I will only be able to do 1 or 2 exams. So they'll register for and pay the registration and exam fees for those 1 or 2 parts, sit within those 6 months, and then they'll go back and re-register for the additional ones. Sometimes there is, and I can't remember if Georgia has one, sometimes there is a small reapplication fee, but we find that it's worth to pay that small reapplication fee as opposed to potentially losing out on hundreds of dollars because you weren't able to sit for the other exams within that 6-month time period. Then you will schedule your exam at a Prometric testing center. You do this very much like you do a doctor's appointment. You pick a location, you pick a date and time that you want to come in. They're open 6 days a week, and you can sit for the exam at any Prometric testing center in the country. So regardless of whether or not you are registering to be certified and licensed in Georgia, maybe you have to travel out of state for an audit gig, or maybe you're visiting family somewhere, but it coincides with your exam date. You're eligible to sit anywhere in the United States for your exam, regardless of where you are getting licensed. You will need a copy of your notice to schedule in order to sit for the exam, along with 2 forms of ID. The name on both forms of ID and the notice to schedule have to match exactly, or they will not let you sit for the exam. From there, you take your exam, you receive your scores. Typically, it's anywhere from 6 to 11 days after the cutoff receipt date, which is usually 24 to 48 hours after the completion of the exam. Availability and testing windows. We should update this slide because we are so close to the end of 2017. It was a little different this year. Last April of 2016, they actually extended the testing windows into the first 10 days of what was called the blackout months. So moving forward, this current testing window is open through December 10th, and then it's blacked out for the rest of the year. But going into January of 2018, we are going back to a regular schedule of it being the first 2 months of a quarter plus the 10 days in that 3rd month. And then the remaining days of that 3rd month are going to be your blackout month. It's really important to note when the blackout periods are. A lot of people weren't aware that there were blackout months and they thought that they could sit during this time, most people make the most out of these blackout periods and utilize it to just focus on studying. That way, when the new testing window opens, they'll be closer to being able to sit for one of the exams. So as I mentioned, you'll be taking the exam at Prometric testing centers. With the Prometric testing centers, as I mentioned, they are located all across the country. You're free to take it wherever you want. I always suggest having a couple of different choices for your Prometric testing center of choice. Sometimes they get booked up on the date that you want to sit for the exam. There are more than just CPA candidates testing at Prometric testing centers, so we don't want you to have to sacrifice your schedule. We suggest that you be a little flexible and be willing to travel just a little bit further to your second Prometric testing center of choice. A lot of them will also let you go in and kind of take a tour of the facility. One, it's important to know what your commute is going to be like. I stress this even more when I lived in California and lived in LA, because on any given day, you could be stuck in traffic for hours for no good reason. So you want to have a good idea of what that commute is going to look like, what the parking situation is going to look like. I actually worked with a firm out in Santa Barbara, and she wished that one of my points of contact there wished that she could have done the tour of the Prometric testing center, because the one that she went to was right next to a dog, like a doggy daycare, and it wasn't the dogs barking that bothered her throughout the whole 4 hours. It was the music the employees were playing. So as you can see here, these people are wearing noise-canceling headsets, which they do provide you, but the music was still so loud that it distracted her during that test-taking process. Had she known that, she would have chosen a different location. So it's really important to just understand where you're going, what the expectations are when you get there, because they will treat you as if you are going to be cheating. I've heard jokes from candidates that they're worse than TSA at the airport. You're very limited in what you can wear and what you can bring into the Prometric testing centers. So for example, women, if you come in with a cardigan and you get too warm, you can't simply just take the cardigan off and sit it on the back of your chair. You have to get the proctor to get signed out, lock it up, go back in, all the while your clock is ticking, and you don't want something like that to be the reason why you couldn't answer all of the questions within the 4 hours you were given. Certain watches you can't bring in, certain jewelry. You can bring in your own little soft foam earplugs if you wanted to, but they're going to inspect them for, I don't know, I guess they think you're going to, you know, you planted some transmitting device in there and somebody's feeding you answers. But they are very clear on their website what the prohibited items are, so I definitely encourage candidates to make themselves aware of that. And arrive earlier than you need to be there. You don't want being late to be the reason why you can't sit for the exam and you forfeit those exam fees. Even if you need to sit in your car for 30 minutes in an hour going through flashcards or doing some practice questions, it's better to be safe than sorry in this situation, especially if you're having to pay for it out of pocket and your firm isn't covering your exam fees. So when you are in the Prometric Testing Center, they do provide you with some materials on exam day. Here you'll see what the on-screen calculator with tape function looks like. I mentioned the noise canceling devices, and again, it says whiteboard, but it's usually a laminated piece of paper. You get a couple of those with a non-erasable marker. One thing to note is that if you completely fill up those 2 laminated pieces of paper, you can get new ones, but you will have to give them the ones that you've already used. They won't let you keep them, so that's something to keep in mind as well. So to pass the exam, all you need is a 75 or better. Nobody at the firm is going to ask you what your score is. All they care about is whether or not you passed. 74 and less, unfortunately, is a non-passing score, and you will have to retake the exam. Currently, you cannot retake an exam in the same testing window that you failed it in. So say I sat for exam in January and failed, I won't be able to take that exam until Q2. Requirements for licensure within Georgia, again, very, very easy as opposed to some of the other states. Passing the exam is only one of them. You will need full-time work experience, which is 2,000 hours under the supervision of a licensed CPA. This can be public accounting, business, industry, government, or even college teaching. The experience must have been earned no earlier than 1 year prior to your application. Private industry does count, but your duties should involve using internal control systems, management advisory, financial advisory, consulting, tax, and regulatory laws. In terms of your educational requirements, you do need 150 units total for your licensure. The reason being is that all of the states now have adopted this 150 needed for licensure, and it helps with reciprocity. So if you wanted to leave the state of Georgia and practice in another state, you'd have less hoops to jump through in order to be able to do so. Within the 150, you will also need a total of 30 semester units in accounting, upper division courses, and then 24 semester units in general business subjects. The national pass rate for the exam has consistently fluctuated between about a 47 and a 50%, and that's an all-inclusive group of people who used a review course, those who didn't, those in a MAC program, those working in a profession, and again, a lot of it doesn't have to do with them not knowing the content. A lot of it has to do with their dedication and determination to the process. This is not an IQ exam by any means. The people that tend to be the most successful are the ones that make a plan and they stick to it. And also choosing the CPA review course that's going to work best for you is really, really important. I love to tell everybody that they should use Rogers CPA review, but the truth is that everybody learns differently. Everybody has, some people like doing a live model. Some people like having somebody just strictly lecture to them. Everybody is different. But what we've done with our course is we've done a lot of research and development on learning styles, and we've tried to incorporate different features and also different supplements to cater to different learning styles. Our pass rate for our course is 88%. That's for first-time test takers for all 4 parts. And a lot of that is something we attribute to what we call the Roger method. It's learning the materials, practicing with our interactive practice questions, our full CPA exam simulator, and then using our support tools like the customized study planners, our personal trainer to keep you on track, and then access to our homework help center. I mentioned time management a lot during this presentation. It's very, very important to have a plan that you that's realistic, number one, and that you can stick to. The AICPA recommends a minimum of 300 to 400 hours total study time for all 4 parts of the exam. That is a lot of time, and that can be very overwhelming. So what we do is we provide our students with a 3-month, a 6-month, a 9-month, or a 12-month study planner. Really, it's which one the candidates use is based on their own individual goals. Again, I mentioned most of our students pass within a 9 to 12-month time period, only because those study planners allow for, I believe it's somewhere between 3 to 4 or 5 days of studying a week, because a lot of our students are working or are going to classes. Our study planners are fully customizable. You can export them into Excel and shift them around to suit your schedule. But essentially what it does is it takes the guessing game out of the process. We are telling you exactly which video lectures, which classroom questions you should be reviewing, and then which task-based simulation and multiple choice questions you should be doing within our interactive practice questions. our study planners ensure that our candidates are not only reviewing all of the content before their exam date, but also they're practicing a sufficient amount of time, practicing sufficiently prior to sitting for the exam. And then here on the bottom row, you can see that we have final review days as well. So that might entail you going through individual chapters or doing a cram course if you have one, or even doing our exam simulator where you're sitting there for, the 4 hours, and I will get to that in just a moment. From there, you go into our learning component. This is an example of what our Rogers CPA review lectures look like. I'm going to play it. It's not very long, but a couple of things I want to point out before I do play it is that all of our video lectures are taught by Roger Phillip, who is a CPA. He is the CEO of the company. He's always teaching in a classroom setting in front of a whiteboard, so it is very much a teaching course. It's not a voiceover PowerPoint or him telling you what to highlight in your textbook. The video lecture is side by side with the e-textbook. We do still give all of our students physical textbooks because some people do like to still have that hard copy. But you'll notice here in this video demo that it is a fully integrated online course. So within here, you'll see that the student can take notes and save them. They can go back and later print those notes if they wanted to. They can video bookmark, so maybe there's a really cool mnemonic or memory aid that Roger mentions. They could bookmark it, so when they visit the video later, they can just click that bookmark and go straight to that point. They can search through the e-text. They can highlight the e-text. We do have closed captioning. We are the only course that is ADA friendly at this time. You can speed him up, you can slow him down, but I will just give you an example of what the learning component looks like here.
So, what does this mean? TT means title transfers. That means that by the time the lease ends, the title transfers from the lessor to the lessee, TT. That means that the lessee is going to own the asset. They're going to have the pink slip to the Porsche. They're going to own it. If they're going to own it in 5 or 10 years, wouldn't it make sense to just debit the asset today as if they purchased it? Wouldn't it make sense to just debit and start depreciating it? Wouldn't it make sense that you should pay executory taxes, insurance, and maintenance? Yeah, because in substance it's a purchase. It's like a rental. In reality, the right to ownership is transferred. In other words, the right to transfer. What that means is you can buy this asset at the end of the lease term for a bargain. At the end of the lease, the asset's worth 30 grand. You could buy it for 3 grand. So let's think about it. If you give me 3, I'll give you 30. If you give me 3, I'll give you 30. Would you do it? Don't think too long. Yeah. So therefore, if you buy it, that's a capital E. The next one is 75% and 90%. Now, the 75% says that if the lease term, and this is important, greater than equal to 75% of its useful life, that means that you're leasing it for at least 3/4 of its life. That means you're getting most of the what we call economic benefit. Since you're getting most of the economic benefit, that means that we're going to get the asset. Here says if the present value minimum lease payments of the MUF is again greater than or equal to 90% of the fair market value at inception. So what that says is that if you're paying the present value of the future payments that you're going to be making are greater than or equal to 90% of the value, you're paying most of the value, we consider that a capital lease. Now, TT, VPO, 75 or 90, TT, VPO, 75 or 90, woo. Anyway, so that's the memory. How many DVDs?
And that is Roger Phillip. As you can see, he's pretty dynamic. He's pretty entertaining. That's really our goal as a company is, again, I said it, to make it enjoyable. Studying the 300 to 400 hours is a very daunting task, but he tries to make it as enjoyable as possible for the candidates so they're not dreading having to sit down and study day after day after day for months and months. So that is an example of what our learning component looks like. And then from there, our students typically go into the practice portion, which is going into our interactive practice question software. So currently we have over 6,200 multiple choice and task-based simulation questions. We do incorporate the new higher order skills and the document, the DRS, the task-based simulation that was introduced last year. They are fully customizable quizzes. We do have diagnostic reporting, and then I will talk about the full exam simulator as well. So as you can see here, this is what one of our multiple choice questions will look like. You will notice that it mimics the CPA exam as much as we legally could. So you are going to not have a countdown timer, but instead it's time elapsed clock at the top. You'll have an on-screen calculator function. You can scroll through the questions. You can flag the questions just like you would be able to do at the Prometric Testing Center. You also can submit the Quizlets. If you decided to do a quiz that's both multiple choice and task-based simulation, we'll only put the multiple choice questions in one Quizlet. So when you submit this Quizlet, it will close you out of that and then transfer you to the task-based simulation question. A couple of other things I do like to point out here is that beneath each of the questions in our interactive practice questions, you will have a section that says review related course topics. So maybe you're looking at a question and you are drawing a blank. You are saying, I don't remember covering this at all in my studies. There will be a live link below each of the questions that will take you to the actual video lecture and textbook pages relevant to that content. It'll open it up in a new window for you. All of your quizzes are saved in your test bank, so you can go back and retake it or review any notes that you make. So for this person, they're saying, I really need to review audit evidence. I'm going to save this note, so when I look at this quiz again, it'll be my reminder. A couple of other features we have are full answer explanations as to why the answers are correct or incorrect. We kind of keep the learning process going even in the self-practice portion. And then if you wanted to, you can score as you go. Gives you immediate feedback on how you're doing as you progress through the quiz. So you'll see here that they're giving them the score, average attempts per question, average time per question, and then what percentage of the way through the quiz that they are. We do have diagnostics as well, so here you'll see that we have a course overview and then an individual section breakdown. So here you can see how many questions you've answered total within not only all of audit, but the individual chapters, and then how many are still left unanswered. You will also see how many you got correct, how many you got incorrect, if you bookmarked any questions, if you have any questions with notes. The font on this is very light, but there are numbers here, and those numbers are live links. So if I wanted to go into Audit 2, which is Professional Responsibilities and Ethics, and look at the one question I got wrong within that, I would be able to click on that number 1, and it will pull that up. For Chapter 1, it looks like I got 8 questions wrong so far. I can click on that number 8, and it will pull up those 8 questions and show me what I answered and what the correct answer is. Really important for having candidates kind of assess where their strengths and weaknesses lie within the content. And then finally, as I mentioned, we have the full exam simulator. So as I was saying, the CPA exam simulator really just hones in on your test-taking strategy, your time management skills, and your self-discipline. I don't know about you, but I can't sit down for a very long period of time without getting up. So that's definitely something that I would have to work on in terms of self-discipline. And essentially, if you study, you will pass. Hopefully, it's with the Roger method. But if not, again, we just encourage a lot of candidates to do their research and to pick the CPA review course that's going to work best for them. A lot of people we find, especially, younger undergrads just graduating, will choose what their friend is using. But I always tell them your friend's not the one who's going to be sitting for you. So really be wise and choose something that's going to work for you. We do have an exclusive student discount. It's 10% off of all of our courses and products. If you're a member of the GSCPA, it's a 15% discount, but we also partner with a lot of firms and universities as well. For those that have to pay for the course out of their own pocket because they are working at a firm that doesn't cover the cost, or maybe they just haven't gotten an offer yet, we do offer easy, flexible financing options. You choose a monthly payment that works best for you. There are no upfront or hidden fees and no deferred interest. It doesn't have a negative impact on your credit score to see if you're eligible for this option, and it's available on all of our courses and products at any price point. As I mentioned, we do partner with a lot of universities and firms across the country. A lot of firms do offer great incentives to their staff in terms of CPA review, whether it be covering the cost, covering exam fees, giving them a bonus. Some of the firms will even offer, as the firm I work with in Texas, will offer study time on Fridays, where they'll give half of the day to their CPA candidates to go into a room and kind of have a little study group. It's really important when you get hired at a firm to ask what their CPA review policies are, because each firm is different and you want to understand what your options are. Some firms as well will have exclusive advertising rights with one CPA review provider, but that does not mean that they won't pay for the provider of your choice. It's just a matter of you asking. And then with universities, a lot of universities I'm finding are starting to incorporate CPA review content more and more into their curriculum, because they're understanding that it's important to make that correlation in terms of the content early on. And they want to see the students achieve success, and they want to increase the campus's pass rates for the exam. So a lot of master's programs are incorporating CPA review in very different fashions. Some offer it as a value add-on. If you enroll in their program, you get a free CPA review course. Some fully integrate it into their curriculum. So you'll notice that trend more and more with universities across the country. And that is essentially it. This is my contact information, phone number, email. I am on Twitter as well, so you can follow me there. Do you guys have any questions for me about either the CPA review, licensure, or our review course?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One of them, you mentioned that you had to have 2 forms of ID at the testing center. What 2 forms of ID do they generally accept?
Sure. Usually the first one is going to be a photo ID, and then the second one could be something like your debit or your credit card, just as long as the name on both of those match the notice to schedule exactly.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, which is going to be how, I know you said that they're particular, but I have 4 names. I have 2 middle names. So some identifications only have one of those middle names. Are they going to be that particular about it with your personal experience with it?
And I think it also might depend on the Prometric Testing Center. I've heard it go both ways. Most people err on the side of caution, and they'll find 2 forms of identification that are exactly alike, and they will use that exact name when applying for the exam to make sure that their notice to schedule has that exact name. It mostly comes into play, really, I've found, with women that may not have changed their maiden name. So maybe they applied with their married name, but their license and maybe one of their debit cards still has their maiden name on it, and they've run into issues because the last names didn't match. Not so much of a big deal if, say, like you said, you have 4 names, but it still shows that your first and your last name are identical. So I haven't seen very many issues on that end. Mostly, unfortunately, it's with women and they're married and their maiden names.
But you said that differs from center to center, so if we think that it may be questionable, would that be a good way to find out?
I would ask. Yep, I would say it wouldn't hurt to reach out and ask and say, hey, one form of ID says this, the other one says this. Is that going to be an issue?
Okay.
Are there any particular times of the year when maybe you run any specials on your services, like on your things, like maybe right at graduation time in the spring, or
I have to say
something special?
Right.
Yeah.
At this point in time, if anybody follows us on social media, they will see that we run promotions regularly. So it's hard to find a time where we aren't running a sale. But to your point, you will find that right before spring semesters conclude, that is probably when you'll find our most significant promotions. We're running promotions now. It's just that the number of December graduates is not as great as the number of May graduates, so we tend to run better specials in the spring as opposed to the winter.
Well, I think that's just good advice for anything in this kind of thing, to always check the various sources of information.
Oh, absolutely. And in terms of the Prometric Testing Center, just popped into my head, their busiest time of year tends to be November. So if any candidate is thinking of sitting in the month of November, either this month or going forward, they tend to get booked up the most because it's typically the last month of the year when candidates can sit, so there's a mad rush to just get it done. So if any candidate plans on sitting in November, we encourage them to apply sooner than later.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
I have one last question. Being that it is November, do y'all offer any incentives to veterans?
We do, and I can't tell you what it is off the top of my head, but if you go to our website, there is a discount tab, and it will pull up the various discounts that we offer throughout the year that are consistent, and there is one for that. I may, if you are interested in purchasing this month, I've been given a special promotional code to use for the month of November that may be an even better deal. And my promotional code would be 30% off, which is greater than any of the discounts I believe that we offer. So you'd be able to email me for that particular promotional code.
Right, yeah, I've got your information.
Well, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any comments? I sent it on the chat to our online group, and I haven't received any questions, but we really appreciate your taking this time with us. And I will say at various continuing education seminars and different kind of meetings that I've been to over the last 5 years, I've really been impressed with the presence that your company has had at all of those kinds of things, and the support that you've given to faculty and students in scholarships and advice, and it's very much appreciated.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot to mention that anybody who's in the room with you or viewing remotely, Joni Hammond is going to send out a link that I gave to her, and it's going to be a raffle for a scholarship certificate to our course. So it's going to be a 50% off scholarship certificate.
That would be great. We've had a sign-in sheet for our students here on campus that are attending, and we'll get that together, and Ms. Hammond will get that handled for us, I'm sure. So thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Not a problem. I thank you guys for your time, and I hope that you have a wonderful week.